Welcome to Around the House, sponsored by Romac Building Supply. I'm your host, Don Magruder. If you like today's show, please go to aroundthehouse.tv and subscribe to our YouTube channel and our weekly newsletter. In this segment of Around the House, Tommy Carpenter, he's Director of Emergency Management here in Lake County, Florida, is going to be here to discuss 2019 hurricane preparedness. A lot has changed and we've learned a lot of lessons. The last 3 years have been tough for hurricanes, and this year plans to be no better. So today we have a lot to talk about. There's changes in sheltering, how you should prepare. So I'm happy to introduce Tommy Carpenter, the Director of Office of Emergency Management here in Lake County. Tommy, good to see you again.
Nice to see you. Thank you for the invitation.
We're happy that you are here because this is for years it was almost a fiction subject or something that could happen. The last 3 years things have changed, haven't they?
They have, and one of the questions I get asked most is what's different about this year, and it was that lull between 2005 and 2016. We had nothing. So we would go out and we'd talk to folks, and we had a lot of folks that wanted to learn, but then we had a lot of folks that say, well, it won't happen in Florida. And these last 3 years have changed that.
And the real scary part of this, these were not just little tropical storms or Category 1 storms. These were major hurricanes. In fact, Hurricane Michael was just upgraded to a Category 5 that hit Mexico Beach. That's changing the dynamics of hurricane preparedness across the state, isn't it?
Well, it sure has shown folks how these hurricanes can get stronger and how they can impact. So Hurricane Michael was essentially a tornado the size of a hurricane, and so we've seen the devastation that it's done.
So this year, hurricane preparedness is not a suggestion; it's almost a mandate. Mm-hmm. Before the storm, let's talk about some things that need to happen. Hurricane's not threatening. Say you're in a situation, hurricane's not threatening. What should people be doing to prepare for an eventual threat?
So I think the first thing they need to do is where they live. Are they in a safe structure? Are they in an unsafe structure? And just even day to day, make sure that their house and everything is secure. So pick up debris, your gutters are clear and free, if we do get projected to get a hurricane, that you've got something to cover windows, prepare to cover your air conditioning unit, and think about the inside for the electricity for the surge protectors, because often we see with lightning strikes that it can affect electronics inside. And even if you don't look at hurricanes, just look at the severe weather we get day to day, where we get the strong winds and the thunderstorms, and where Marion County just got a tornado several days ago that they said peak winds were 105 miles per hour.
Wow. Something's changed in Florida, though, and it happened with Hurricane Matthew and Irma. Before there was a lot of, everyone needs to evacuate. Mm-hmm. State of Florida has changed some of those guidelines because from what I understand, they've determined it's more hazardous to put millions of people on the road. So isn't the new recommendations, if you're living in a safe structure, not directly in the path, you should probably stay there?
So for coastal residents, it's not, don't evacuate hundreds of miles, evacuate tens of miles. Get out of the immediate surge areas and get to a safe structure where you can shelter. So with Irma, we saw, I think, over 2 million people evacuated in Florida. And at the same time Irma was coming, we were watching what was going on in Texas with Harvey. So it really got folks prompted to move soon, and it created some issues.
So if you're in a safe structure, probably better not to evacuate.
If you're and this is what we need to be doing right now in terms of planning. If you're in a safe structure, make sure that you've got coverings for the windows. If doors and windows need to be resealed, reseal them. Make sure your air conditioning unit's protected, and that you don't have anything that can fly around in the yard to create a projectile.
Now I know people in your office recommend that each home has a hurricane plan.
Correct.
And part of that plan is communications and where you're going to go. What are some of your recommendations for making that hurricane plan?
So find somebody that you know that lives out of town, or if you don't have any friends or family that are out of town, communicate with folks that are local so that you can communicate before, during, and after. Often with families with teenagers that drive, have in place your plan of who you're going to communicate with and how you're going to communicate. And if our communication systems are down locally, can you communicate with somebody out of town that at least you can coordinate your efforts?
And that hurricane plan really should be an emergency plan, because God knows there could be a catastrophe happen that everyone needs to know where the rendezvous point is, isn't it?
Absolutely. 2013, within 2 weeks of each other, we had Blue Rhino, propane explosion, and then 2 weeks later, the Summer Bay sinkhole.
Yeah.
And so those are things that happened in the middle of the night.
Now, one of the recommendations, everyone should have a hurricane kit, actual kit. What are your recommendations for that particular kit? What should people have so at a moment's notice they can pull it out and they're ready to go?
So if I had to leave my house immediately, I've got important papers, especially insurance documents, the things that I may need if my structure's damaged. Cash is huge. If power goes out after Irma, 77% of the county was without power immediately after. So make sure you have cash because you may not be able to use a credit or debit card. If you are going to have to plan for a longer term, such as a hurricane, non-perishable foods, make sure you have a manual can opener, a gallon of water per person per day.
A gallon of fresh water per person per day.
Correct.
That's vital.
It is absolutely imperative. Any clothes that you may need. So after a hurricane, we're asked many times, what is it that I need to be aware of? And just be aware of that it could be very hot, very humid, and you may not have power, you may not have air conditioning. And then you need to be protected because animals get displaced too. So there's no telling what you may encounter, down power lines, down utility lines. You just have to generally be careful.
And a lot of people make mistakes with prescription drugs and such as that.
They do. And so current Florida law, if I'm not, a hurricane's coming and I need to get a refill on a prescription, and I had just done it, but I'm not sure when I may get it refilled again. Florida law allows that if the governor issues an executive order, or if the county activates the EOC, then I can go back and get a refill.
So once again, if the governor issues executive warning, and normally that's when the official hurricane watcher warning's been posted.
It'll usually be before.
Yeah. You can go ahead and refill your prescriptions even though you may not need them.
Correct.
Because they want to make sure people with medicines gets it. That's a big issue for a lot of our seniors, isn't it?
It is. They take life-saving medicine every day and they don't want to run out.
Okay, Tommy, we're sitting here and say there's a major storm churning in the Caribbean and it's got its sights on Florida. We're a few days out. What should people be doing now to prepare?
This would be the time that you've worked on all your preparations and you're putting them into place. You're communicating with friends and family. You're making sure that my disaster supply kit's in place, that I have everything that I need in my structure. If I'm going to shelter in place, I'm in a safe structure, that I've got everything I need to cover my windows. I've got additional fuel. If the power goes out, I've got multiple methods to charge my smartphone so that I can ensure that I have communication. For folks that aren't sheltering at their home, they live in an unsafe structure, then we encourage year-round to work with friends and family to be able to go there and stay with them. Our public shelters are safe, but they really are a shelter of last resort.
And when we're going to talk a few minutes a lot about sheltering because there's a big misconception on sheltering, but another issue is water. And there's two types of water. There's the type that you drink, and once again, your recommendation. So if a hurricane's threatened, people should anticipate a week maybe without water. So how much water to drink should they have?
I think minimally 5 days, but I know that we had a lot of residents that it took much longer than 5 days to get their power restored after Irma. So based on that, how many days were you out of power? Have at least that much water on hand, if not a little bit more.
So a gallon per person per day. Then you have the water to flush toilets and stuff like that.
Correct.
And to maybe take baths. And it's very important before a hurricane, you fill up everything you have with water, bathtubs and all, because if you're on a septic system, you can use that to flush. Even on other systems, you can generally flush the toilet. Now, sometimes you can't. That's important, isn't it?
It is. So the folks that live where they have wells that are dependent upon electricity, they usually have a pretty good idea of how they need to store water in case electricity goes out, the well fails, then water storage is important. For a lot of folks that live in municipalities where they have city water, they may not do that as often, but it's still a good idea to keep that extra water. You have your water for drinking, and then I've got my additional water set aside for whatever else I may need.
And let's not forget sanitation. The best thing for sanitation is bleach.
Yes.
In fact, you can take a drop of water. People need to look it up, but you can purify water with bleach, a drop of bleach, but I don't want to go down that road. But You got to have sanitation. You got to have sanitation wipes and hand wash, because a big part, unfortunately, of hurricanes is people get sick.
They do. So that goes back to proper food storage, and just making sure Clorox wipes or any type of bleach wipe or disinfectant wipe work well to keep areas clean. But it goes back to making sure you keep your food properly stored, and that old adage that we hear from the health department, if in doubt, throw it out. It's much safer to be safe than sorry and eat something that's bad.
And then finally, if you have an infant or a senior that has a specialty diet issue, you need to have those products in a cooler, or if they don't need to be cooled, but you need to have those products because you may be unable to get to a grocery store.
That's correct. So think about who's in your family. Do you have seniors that have special needs? Do you have infants with special needs? Do you have children with special needs? Make sure that you have those supplies on hand, that you have adequate supplies. If they have specific diet requirements, then do the best you can to plan.
And Tommy, I think we found this out during Irma. The Lake County and Sumter County got impacted with Irma, but because such a wide swath of the coast was heavily damaged, a lot of supplies and stuff were being brought there, and there was a shortage created of certain items. And though you may not be in a direct impact zone, you could experience shortages on fuel and other items because massive devastation elsewhere.
That's correct. So Florida has 3 ports in and how we get fuel. Before we had a fuel shortage and our supplies were good, but it was because of evacuation. Afterwards, where Irma, where its path came between Lake and Sumter counties, we got more of the wind. We didn't get all of the rain. It was those outer bands that got the rain, but then we saw issues with the flooding that created issues with supply.
Tommy, if anybody had any questions about before the storm, during the storm, or prior preparations, how can they reach someone in your office?
So we're available. Our phone number is 352-343-9420. They're welcome to call, and we'll be happy to help them. And on our website, we have information also available.
And real quick, this Alert Lake, it's important, especially since most people don't have house phones now. Take a minute to tell us about that.
It is. So Alert Lake is Lake County's emergency notification system. Easiest way to register is go to www.alertlake.com. And once you register, it's based on where you live, on the address you provide. So the address, that's how the system finds you. So once you register, you automatically get tornado warnings. So the National Weather Service issues a tornado warning. If the area they issue the warning, if your address is there, you're going to get an automated warning. We've used it before for missing persons. We work with the sheriff's office.
And what's that address again, Tom?
It's www.alertlake.com.
Everyone needs to sign up for that. Well, we're going to take a break now, and when we return, we're going to get into the big issue of sheltering. There's a lot of things that have changed in sheltering, and it's very important you understand it. Stay tuned, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Around the House, sponsored by Romac Building Supply. I'm your host, Don Magruder, and we've been having a great discussion with Tommy Carpenter. He's the Director of Office of Emergency Management here in Lake County, talking about this hurricane season and the things you need to know just in case we have a threat or hurricane. Tommy, when we left, we had gotten everybody up to the hurricane. Now, let's say a hurricane is upon us. Hurricane effect winds are starting to affect Lake County. Maybe someone's decided to stay home and they get scared. Tell us the position of what Lake County can do for you then.
That's going to put myself and other responders in a tough place, because this is why we want folks to plan and prepare. Once we get tropical storm force winds of 40 miles per hour and greater, then more than likely if someone dials 911, they're not going to get an ambulance or a fire truck because the winds are just too strong.
Okay.
So after that period of time, if somebody's home and decided to stay home and then they regret staying home and they want to leave, that may be a tough situation. We'll always look in the county to see, it depends, because we have such a long county, depending on where it is, if we can get public safety folks to them, we will. But if we can't, then that person's going to have to stay in place.
And we do have, while we don't have a tidal surge issue from hurricane flooding, we do have river flooding and some lake flooding around here. We had that during Irma, some pretty significant flooding. So if you're in a flood zone, you definitely need to take heed, shouldn't you?
You should. So folks ought to know ahead of time about flooding and to know whether their property is prone to flooding or not. We saw typically around the St. Johns, we see flooding. We even saw flooding in East Lake County where we haven't seen it in years.
All right, Tommy, now we're going to get into shelters.
Okay.
Shelters is a complicated issue. You have regular shelters, you have pet-friendly shelters, and you have medical shelters. First off, why don't you tell us the difference between a regular shelter, a pet-friendly shelter, and a medical shelter?
Okay. So the county has 15 shelters, and of those 15 shelters, 5 of those are for special needs clients. So to become a special needs client, what folks can do is they can contact our office, register for the program. Their information goes to the health department reviews it and then makes that determination. Do they need to go to a special needs shelter or can they go to a general risk shelter?
So this is prior to the hurricane?
Prior to the hurricane.
Now, special needs, if someone's on an oxygen machine or they have to be plugged in, that's a medical, or maybe other needs. I don't know what the definitions are.
Correct. So what the health department will look at is anybody with physical, mental, or cognitive disabilities.
Okay.
However, mostly we see folks on oxygen.
Now, where are these 5 shelters? What are these 5 shelters?
So we have the list here. They're in Astatula Elementary School, Leesburg Elementary School, Lost Lake Elementary School, Umatilla Elementary, and the Villages Elementary in Lady Lake.
So those 5 shelters, if you pre-register, you can get help with your medical needs.
Yes.
Now let's explain something about sheltering. In any shelter, you don't get much but a cold slab of floor.
That is true in our general risk sheltering. With special needs, the health department will provide cots for those folks.
Okay.
But in our general risk shelter, I have nowhere to go and I need somewhere to go that's safe. You get 20 square feet. And so in that 20 square feet, you can bring a sleeping bag or an air mattress.
So roughly you get 3 foot by 6.5 foot to put an air mattress, sleeping bag, and all what you brought with you in that area.
That's correct.
You don't get any blankets, you don't get any food, you don't get anything.
The schools typically will provide meals.
Okay.
They're very basic meals, but it's just meant to get you by while you're there. It's nothing fancy.
Okay. All right. So we talked about the medical shelters, and those shelters again. Can you give us that list?
Sure. So they're in Astatula Elementary School, Leesburg Elementary, Lost Lake Elementary, Umatilla, and Villages Elementary.
Around here, we got a lot of folks that love their animals, and rightly so. For many folks, that animal may be their ex-spouse or that's their company, and they will not leave a pet behind. So Lake County does have pet-friendly shelters. Tell us how pet-friendly shelters work.
So of the 15 shelters, 9 are pet-friendly. And what we ask them to do is to bring a crate, make sure that the pet has a crate that they can stay in.
So the pet can't run loose?
No, the pet does not run loose. To bring their vaccination records, food, water for the pet, and the pets are kept away from the people. Pets are kept in a separate area. So while it's still blue skies outside, the owner is welcome to stay with their pets. Once the wind picks up, and we know that we're going to get those increased sustained winds, the pets go in their place and people go in their place until the weather is passed.
But to be clear, the pet can never be incorporated with all the other humans.
Typically, no. Now, with the exception we may see is with a service animal. And so we make plans to make sure those folks are kept in a different place, but pets are kept in a different area.
So to bring your pet to a pet-friendly shelter, you have to have a crate.
Mm-hmm.
That's you have to have vaccine records. You have to have food for the animal, and if it needs a toy or whatever, correct? Anything to calm it down.
Anything that it needs to keep it occupied.
Now, what are the 9 pet-friendly shelters, Tommy?
So our 9 pet-friendly shelters include all of our special needs shelters are pet-friendly.
So if someone has a special needs and has a little animal, they can bring their pet under those conditions.
Correct.
Okay.
So the 5 that I previously mentioned, which are all elementary schools, Astatula, Leesburg, Lost Lake, Umatilla, and the Villages. And the other 4 shelters are Mascot Elementary, Round Lake Elementary outside of Mount Dora, Spring Creek Elementary in Paisley, and Treadway Elementary by the Lake Square Mall.
Now, do you have to register priorhand at a pet-friendly shelter, or just show up as long as you have the pet in a crate with vaccination records?
You do not have to pre-register as long as you show up with everything that you need.
Okay. And the next thing is we have regular shelters.
We do.
And at that regular shelter, it's going to be pretty bare bones, isn't it?
It is extremely bare bones.
So what are they going to get at a regular shelter?
So they get their 20 square feet, and they are provided meals, and that's about it.
So, but no snacks,
no,
no sodas, nothing like that?
No, it's very basic.
And what are those shelters?
So those shelters are included. The additional ones we've added are East Ridge High School, East Ridge Middle School, Eustis High, Leesburg High, Mount Dora High, and Tavares High.
And there's certain rules you have to follow in that shelter.
That's correct.
And because each shelter has law enforcement there, the sheriff's office.
They do.
And what rules do you have to follow?
So what they do, we really consider folks that go to shelters, that's their home. They've had to leave their home, so that's where they're going to reside during the storm. Talking about the sheriff's office, our Lake County Sheriff's Office, the school resource deputies who normally are in schools have been American Red Cross trained as shelter managers.
Okay.
So they manage the shelter, which has been a big plus for us. And then once the folks get into that general dormitory area, then the rules are posted on the wall. We don't like phones, we don't like pictures or social media, because we really consider it inside someone's home.
So it's privacy issue.
It's privacy issue, so we ask folks to respect that. Sometimes we get the media that come up and want to talk to folks. We don't let the media in that area. Again, it's someone's home for that time being, so we'll let folks know, hey, someone here is from the media, they want to talk to you, and then folks can choose to go out. And then it's really just it's common courtesy and respect.
But I'm sure there's no smoking?
There's no smoking that's allowed.
No alcohol?
No.
No drugs?
No drugs.
What about weapons?
No, so we know that we have had instances where folks have inadvertently brought weapons. They are absolutely not permitted in a shelter. Someone's walked in and said, oh my gosh, I have a weapon. So our sheriff's office has been great about taking them and securing them for the event, and then when everybody leaves, they'll allow them to have their weapons.
So no weapons, no alcohol, no drugs, no smoking. You got to be respectful, and no social media pictures inside the shelter.
That's correct.
Once again, this is a shelter of last resort.
It is. So we want folks to work and stay with friends and family if they can, and if they have nowhere else to go, then a county shelter is available.
And I think local residents here in Lake and Sumter County need to understand that they're in the safest. In fact, I think Lake County was rated for, as far as hurricanes, the safest county in the state of Florida. Is that true or not?
It is one of the safe. We're in the middle of the state, and with Hurricane Irma, even though it impacted Florida as I believe a Category 4, when the Weather Service came back and looked at how the impacts were for Lake County, our sustained winds they estimated between 50 and 65 miles per hour, which is below hurricane. The strongest wind they recorded was 64 miles per hour at the airport. And then we know we got wind gusts between 80 and 90 miles an hour, but just for everyone relive Irma and think about what they went through with Irma, we really still didn't have a hurricane.
Absolutely. We and that's one of the great things. But the other thing about the shelters is we may be sheltering folks from Miami-Dade, from Fort Lauderdale. Our shelters could be full with folks from other areas of the states. So that's the reason why it's very important if you're in a home that's built well, that you stay home and maybe get some friends to stay with you because you'll be more comfortable, won't you?
You will be. And one of the things we learned is as folks are moving into Florida and into Lake County, they are moving into newer, safer site-built homes, and they automatically thought, oh, I need to go to a shelter. And so we've really worked to educate folks. You don't. There's a few things you can do to your home. You can be safe here. You can welcome and encourage friends and family to stay with you. You don't need to go to a shelter.
Once again, let's just go through these shelters one more time.
Okay.
The medical shelters are where?
So our special needs shelters are in elementary schools. They are Astatula, Leesburg, Lost Lake, Umatilla, and Villages Elementary.
And our pet-friendly shelters?
Our pet-friendly shelters are the ones I just mentioned, plus Mascot Elementary, Round Lake Elementary, Spring Creek, and Treadway Elementary.
And if you need a list of all these shelters, they can go to your website or give you a call.
They can.
Real quick, the hurricanes come through Lake County. We've had some damage. What should people not do?
Well, they should be very careful when they venture outside their homes. Don't touch any downed power lines or any utility lines, and be very careful of their surroundings. Again, animals, they get displaced too, and when they do, they can be scared and attack folks. So be very careful of that.
A lot of people have generators, and it seems like every year there are severe accidents. I know in Ocala during Irma, someone died from filling a generator up while it was running with fuel and it exploded. and then there's some people who had down in state who passed away from carbon monoxide. Talk about how important it is to have generators.
Generator safety is extremely important. I believe in Lake County in 2004 we had someone that died from carbon monoxide exposure. And I know after Irma we worked with our fire services in areas where we knew power was out, and they went door to door anywhere that they saw a generator. Astor was one of those areas because it was completely out of power, and I know that our fire chief personally interacted with many folks because they had their generators too close to the house, they weren't properly vented, so they made sure they did those door-to-doors to let folks know you need to change it, what you're doing.
And never, ever put a generator inside a garage.
Never. No.
Never. And the other thing I tell senior citizens, if you're not used to working a chainsaw, don't pick it up. If you're not used to working chainsaws and other tools and getting on ladders, more and more people hurt and maim themselves so bad during hurricanes because they're unfamiliar with these tools.
That's right. That's not the time to learn how to use a chainsaw.
Right. Tommy Carpenter, thank you so much for all these great tips. One more time, if someone had a question,
Sure.
What's a good phone number they can give you a call
They
at?
can call our office at 352-343-9420.
Thank you for watching Around the House today, and be sure to catch Around the House weekly on LSTV, and also go to aroundthehouse.tv to sign up for our YouTube channel and our weekly newsletter. Until next time, we will see you around the house.